Do you really know yourself? For a long time, I thought I knew myself, but it turns out I didn't know myself at all. It was a long, hard struggle to get there. Sometimes I wake up and I still think, even after all the work that I've done, the time that I've put in, I've got a huge road to travel ahead. I hear all the time people saying they don't know themselves, or looking at other leaders and saying, they're a fake. I don't trust them. Because on some level, they sense that those leaders don't know themselves either. How many people have lived lives that are unfulfilled, misaligned, unhappy, and not achieving everything that's possible for themselves, for the companies they work for, or for others, simply because they don't know themselves. Before we start talking about those questions some more, give this channel a little bit of love, press the subscribe button, and share it with some of your friends. Now, let's get back to the question. If you want to get to know yourself better, do you even know how? What's blocking you from doing it? The answers to those questions might surprise you. And by the way, one of those things involves something that's quite controversial. As you watch the upcoming episode, be sure to remember that I, my company, and this channel do not recommend that you follow any course of psychiatric, psychological, medical, or self-help treatment without guidance from an appropriately certified practitioner and or someone with a medical license. The discussion that we're about to have does not represent an endorsement of any treatment or personal or self-development modality or philosophy at all. It is purely here for informational and entertainment purposes. With all of that in mind, let's start talking about how you could dive deep inside yourself, understand who you are, and then start to live out your leadership destiny. Welcome back to the Myth Cafe. I am hanging out with a friend of mine who's all dressed up warm because he's calling in from Alaska. His name is Diego Ugaldé. He is a leadership expert with a perspective unlike any you have ever encountered. Diego, welcome to our discussion about myths, leadership, and life here at the cafe. Talk to us a little bit about who you are, my man.
I love you, bro. You're so awesome. You give me so much energy. Like, it's insane, dude. Very cool. Yeah. My name is Diego. I'm the CEO and founder of the Trident Approach, which is, I was also a retired Navy SEAL. So with the Trident Approach, we share the best of what we learned during our time with the SEAL teams, along with our deepest insights from psychedelic medicine use and the elevated states of consciousness into leading the self and elite teams. That's us.
Did I disappoint, folks? Again, a very unique approach to leadership, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. But before we get into all of that, you came to the Myth Cafe to discuss the very famous figure of Orion. Share with us who Orion is, Diego, how and why he spoke to you.
So Orion is his most famous, I think, subtitle is The Hunter. And for those that don't know, he can be commonly referenced in the stars at night with his own constellation during the winter months. They talk commonly about Orion's belt, where there's like 3 stars, prominent stars lined up in a row, and then there's more that kind of fills out his body around those. But he began to take on significant meaning to me when I very first found out about him. I was in high school. I didn't know that he existed. And I had a moment, really an unforgettable moment with my best friend at the time, he was spending the night at my house, and had this hill behind my house that was, just kind of deserted. And, in high school, it almost seemed like we were doing something. We were trespassing on private property and that kind of thing. And we were just sitting on top of the hill. And this was, before drinking and all that. And we were just talking like real the only kind of communication that I really spend my time around these days, but not common at all back in high school. Back in high school, it was about girls and movies and clothes and stuff like that. But this was two teenage boys really talking about the depths of who we thought we were and the world around us and this type of thing. And it was this very, very bonding moment that made my best friend even bester with myself. And we admitted a lot of things we had never admitted to anybody before. And it was that kind of thing. And just in the middle of this conversation, we were just looking up, and he goes, "Hey, Orion's out." And I'm like, "What's Orion?" And he's like, "Oh, dude, you got to know this guy's story. It's incredible." And I don't know that I'd ever paid attention to what was going on up there. And he pointed out all this particular stars that belonged to his particular constellation. And he told me the story. I was blown away, and I went home and I found that story, and I read a little bit more about him. And for whatever reason, I was just magnetized to this guy. And so I've since gone on to read so much about Orion, and I tell you, it's so funny. It's just, I think it's like many of these mythological, or even really our history as it is known today. There are many different versions, many, many, many different versions. And, well, I think because this was the first version that I heard, it's the one that had resonated the most with me. And plus, it was such a powerful story. And so, yeah, if you want, I can go right into the story that I am aware of Orion, and happy to move on there unless you have any questions.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat. Yes. What's the story? Please.
Okay, so this version of the story is Orion was a titan. He was a giant demigod, son of Poseidon, Poseidon, god of the ocean, which is my jam. And he lived on this island, and there was a queen or a princess Artemis that was there. And Orion was known clearly, without question, as the most effective and powerful hunter in the world at the time. It was strikingly good looking and really, really powerful. And there was no beast that could match him. That's how powerful he was. And he came to know of Artemis, and he fell in love with her from afar. And then he ended up kind of meeting with her, and she fell in love with him. And this was not up to her father's liking. So they kind of had a relationship in private, really, or in secret. And the king made it known to him that he just disagreed with the whole thing. And so Artemis said, "Hey, what is it that you want from me? I'll do it if I can earn your permission to marry your daughter." And he's like, "Well, I need you to go do this certain thing. If you do that, then you can marry her." He's like, "Okay." So he goes out and he does it better than what he had actually asked for. And he's like, "Oh, okay, cool. I need you to do something else. If you do that, you can marry her." So he goes on and does this other thing, does it better than he asked for, comes back. "Yeah, well, here's what I need you to do. I need you to kill every beast on our island. Just protect all of our citizens." And he's like, "Okay." And he goes, and one by one, he kills all of these beasts. It takes him months to find them and track them all down and to kill them. But he wanted to make a really big production of this thing. So he takes all the skins and he puts them in all these different wagons. And then he approaches the kingdom in like a parade fashion with 15 wagons full of beasts, dead beasts in these wagons. And he comes through the gates, and there's all this commotion going on. Like, this island is absolutely free of all the beasts. And the king says, "Here, I need you to do one more thing." And it was in that moment that Orion knew that there was nothing he was going to be able to do that was going to be good enough for him to win the hand of Artemis. And Artemis knew this as well. So they ran off alone, and they ended up getting married on the beach, and they were just staying on the beach. They were just happy together. And the king understood that this happened. And so he told the witch, I need you to get rid of him and bring my daughter back. And so the witch, for whatever reason, chose not to kill him, but blind him. While he was asleep on the beach, she grabbed Artemis, brought her back to their castle, and Orion woke up blind, and Artemis was nowhere to be found. Now, it was well known at the time that if you would come in contact with a Cyclops, that you could regain your vision if you were blind. And there were Cyclops on the island. And so he didn't know what happened. He didn't know the story, but he knew as long as he found a Cyclops, he could figure it out. And it turns out the Cyclops, they blow these big, huge horns from time to time. It's kind of a rare thing, but it happens. Well, one day he heard the horn blowing, so he just started running towards the sound, and he's bumping into trees and tripping over rocks and falling into ravines, and he just kept climbing, just trying to, because he knew he didn't want to lose the sound before he got to the Cyclops, because then he wouldn't, so he keeps climbing. He's like, scrapes and bleeding and bumping his head and all this stuff. And he gets it. He gets to the Cyclops, and he touches the Cyclops, and he regains his vision. He immediately goes back to the castle. He just steals Artemis, and they run away again. And the king is angry at the witch, and he said, I told you, and so she's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. So they're back on the beach, living together, like relieved that they found each other again. And he falls asleep. And one day, the witch came by, and she just produced a scorpion, and the scorpion killed Orion on the beach. She took back Artemis. Now, Artemis was absolutely heartbroken, but she had the capability with her powers as she was to put Orion as the constellations in the sky, to remind herself. But the scorpion had a role to play in this whole thing, so she felt like he deserved a spot in the sky too, but she never wanted Orion to be reminded of how he was taken from her. So she put Scorpius on the opposite side of where Orion was. So every time Orion came up above the horizon, Scorpius would go below. And the same thing, when Scorpius would come up above the horizon, Orion would go down. So he would never be reminded of how he was taken from her. So I thought that was such a cool story. And, it just stayed with me forever. And, there's so much that goes into kind of my own personal experience as well with Orion. So yeah, that's my guy.
Yeah, thank you for that unbelievably good retelling of that story. There are a lot of different versions of the story. It can be hard to sort of put them all into one narrative, and a lot of them contradict each other. By the way, that ending about Scorpio and Orion, again, really spectacularly told. Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Very key point of the story, I feel like. So because of the significance of that conversation that I had with my friend, probably the very first, what I call like cellular conversation with another person, a conversation that really mattered. In their movie Stand By Me, they talk about, hey, these are the kind of conversations that you have before you discover girls. And they're talking about, Mighty Mouse and Superman and stuff like that. All the conversations I had before that were just of simple things. But that night we were talking through our hearts. It was amazing. So because of that, Orion has always been attached to that level of significance to me. It was important. It was an important thing. He mattered to me. The idea mattered to me, and a lot, because it just continued to bring me. But we called it the hill. Anytime we were out with other friends or whatever, and they were talking about whatever it was, he and I would look at each other and just say out loud, "The hill, dude, the hill," And so Orion was really significant for me. And then years later, when I ended up becoming a SEAL and going into combat, I wasn't not religious, and I didn't necessarily have a God to pray to. Well, I didn't have a God that I would pray to, but in SEAL teams, they rotate like on a regular basis. We have these 2-year-long cycles of training, and then more training, and then going on a deployment. And at the end of that deployment, that's the end of the 2-year cycle. So our cycles were always regular. So every time I went to Iraq, it was in the wintertime, which meant every time I was there, Orion was up in the sky. And so when I have a very particular vision in my mind of, we would be standing outside of the gates of wherever it was we were, just about to go on to a mission, and I would click my night vision goggles down and then turn them on, and everything would just be shades of green and black. That was all there was. And I would have these particular hearing protection that would connect with our radios, amplify the sound outside. But if anything got too loud, it would protect the hearing. It was like these really cool things.
Wow.
And, but every time you turned them on, there was like this kind of static going on. And so my routine, as we were standing at the gates, ready for the gates to open to walk out into bad guy territory, I would turn on my nods and I would look up and I would just see Orion's belt, which was, Orion's constellation, which was really vibrant and, green lights, going everywhere. And I'd be like, wherever I'm about to do, I know you got me, brother. And then I'd go down, turn, and then the gates would open and we'd be off to whatever operation we were about to go on to. So if there was a God or if there was anything that I would pray to, it was Orion. And it was it's interesting, the power of the mind, how it could be in the midst of combat and feel a sense of safety and security and protection just by looking up at the stars, which I knew, it didn't matter. It just mattered to me. So that was it,
But,
yeah.
Diego, there's a lot of significance within what you just said. First of all, I want to go as to the conversation on the hill, and that what became basically a magic word between you and your friend, the hill.
Mm-hmm.
You could go there and have a conversation that's real. It's funny because when you are in professional settings, particularly when you are in a leadership position, and I very much am curious as to your thoughts about this as a fellow leadership coach, it can become very isolating. You are aware, if you're any good at all, that people are watching you, that your actions matter, that your demeanor matters, the decisions that you make can impact lives. And you also are aware of how optics can play out. You want to seem professional. You want to many times portray strength to those that are putting their livelihoods on the line by giving up other job opportunities to work for you. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, then it can create gradually over time walls. Now, many leaders end up joining peer advisory groups like 𝗙ście, say, in order to get that sort of support. But even then, the walls that you've built up can be very, very difficult to break down. And many people never understand that they need that hill to go up and look at Orion's belt and have that connection with other people. So 100%. One of the powers of myth and mythological stories is that they are so symbolic. There are so many levels to them, but they're also entertaining. So they can generate riveting conversation while at the same time allowing us to go deep. And so one of the things that I initially want to respond to with regards to what you say is the concept of the hill. Is that something that I'm the only leader, my clients are the only leaders that ever experience this, or is that something you've encountered in your own coaching or your own career as a leader?
It is the only space that that I have time for. If I'm interacting with you and I'm talking about football,
we're probably not heavy. Like a lot of people, that is the extent of their bonding. I mean, especially men. Let's keep it real.
We're not going to be talking for very long. And unless it has something to do with something that's moving your soul, something that you should, existential question that you're wondering about, and not that I have answers for, but the fact that we can sit and, you know, piece things apart and see what's kind of going on. To me, there's so many, like the conversations that I have with you, in 3 seconds, the small talk is gone and we're talking about soul stuff. That's why I value our relationship so much, because it deeply, deeply matters. Everything in my life that I want to keep within my bubble, is all deep. So, yeah. And it's real. That's the thing. Because these conversations, now listen, I was a 49er fan from like 5 years old until I was 45 and 46, actually 48. And it was my life, you know. But I recognized, for example, that I was losing all my Sundays to football, you know, and, you know, there's trees outside and there's the ocean that's outside and there's all of this stuff that I can do. I was kind of missing out on life, sort of thing. So but everything that mattered to me in life was something that was deeply significant somehow. It was never really the surface stuff. Not really. So anyway, that's what I choose to build around me in my bubble, because that's what inspires me. And we were talking about when you start to get raw, start to ask real deep questions, and there's vulnerability there and that type of thing. Not only is everything so much more interesting, but healing can happen. Deep awareness can happen just out of a simple conversation with somebody who's meeting you where you are, sort of on a vibrational level. All these amazing, magical things can happen just in the midst of normal existence. But it has to be in a state of vulnerability. It has to be in a state of deep truth. Like I was saying, you know, there were lies that I was telling as a student in high school. That I was like this, basically on the verge of becoming a professional surfer. And everyone knew me as a surfer. And where I grew up, in Fairfield, California, it was about 2 hours away from any ocean. Everybody's like, I wanted to be unique, kind of thing, you know. And so everybody knew me as like the surfer. And so when we were up there, I was like, man, I got something to tell you. He's like, what? I'm like, I suck at surfing. And he was like, what? You know, like he was like so blown away.
Wow.
And it was just like, I told somebody, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And cause I was safe with them. I could admit it. I could, you know, and I knew that he wasn't going to, hey, guess what, you guys? Diego sucks in surfing. It was just between, you know, this was a bro code thing. And he told me his stuff, and just the love that was there, and the safety and the security and the trust and the vulnerability there. It was just like, this is how I want all human interaction to be, kind of thing.
But you have to have encountered in your career, as well as in your life, as exemplified by this very experience, the fear or the inability to move beyond that, right? How, if you have a client who says, look, all of my friends, and by the way, I have a client that I work with who has faced this exact issue. All of his friends, they might go out and hang out, you know, for beer or whatever after work, but they talk about work. They may talk about projects that are going on. They may gripe about their college, whatever, you know, that sort of conversation, or they may talk about football or movies or other fun stuff. But, you know, this client of mine who is an established, seasoned, very forward-thinking leader said, I have no friends. And after a while, you know, I was on a committee with the New York Bar Association in which we talked about the theme of developing real relationships once your legal career starts and you're in a law firm. You know, it's one thing to say you need to be raw, you need to be vulnerable, but what about someone like that prospect of mine, or I'm sorry, that client of mine, or that the people who might have been attending that bar association presentation? They don't even know where to begin to find someone that they can be raw with, let alone take that first step to be raw and honest, or maybe confess They were a horrible surfer all along. I'm a terrible surfer too, by the way.
Hey, get in the water. You're good enough. Well, you said where to begin. And always, you're right. If you begin with the self, can you be vulnerable to yourself? Because if you can't admit that you suck at surfing to yourself, it's just a lot harder to just go up and, you know what I mean? Like if I just refuse to accept that as the reality, it's really hard to have that conversation with somebody as though it is the reality. It's not. So can you be vulnerable with yourself? If you cannot be vulnerable with yourself, it's good to just notice. I mean, awareness is the key. So think about your biggest, baddest, darkest demons that you can possibly imagine that exist for you in your experience, and see if you can talk to yourself about it. And if you can't, because it's deep and scary and all that, then ooh, I can't even have this conversation with me. I can't even be vulnerable with me. Of course, they don't have friends, deep friends, because deep friends require that level of connection and understanding. So if you want that for yourself, little by little, what's something that you can admit to, that's hard to admit to, but you can do it. Just say it out loud to yourself, something that makes you uncomfortable about whatever your situation is. It's a muscle, just like anything else. Do it more and more, over and over again. And then pretty soon, one day, you're able to talk about these things that you might not have ever spoken about before. And then, excuse me. Human beings, whether you are wired in to energy or not, human beings have this innate sense to understand at least some sort of energetic resonance with another human. You don't have to deeply know somebody to know whether you should be petrified of them or not. That is something like, get it. Okay, I don't know what it is about this person. I just need to stay away. Okay, don't start with that person. Start with a person you're very comfortable, and maybe share with them something you haven't shared before. That's on a lighter level, and see how because a lot of times people are dying for this kind of connection. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad you told me. Because, same thing for me. And I've never told anybody either. And all this, and there you go. And then trust is built over time. Trust is built when it's hard. And when you notice that what you say is safe with them, and that you are safe with them, watch what happens to those conversations. And it'll be, it can be easy over time, and healing to be, that person can be your medicine in a lot of ways.
The importance of trust. One of the things that I also share with folks is that whatever it is that you want from someone else, you need to be yourself. So are you being that friend who is saying, I will listen, I won't judge. I won't, like your friend said to you, I'm not going to go out and tell the whole world that Diego can't surf. You need to be that person. And in my experience, it attracts like mind. And that's, to me, in a way, what you're talking about when you are using terms like soul connection, although we're going to talk a lot more about that in a few minutes. Before we get to that, though, there is an element that you hinted at a few minutes ago that ties into a key chapter of the Orion story, and that is healing. You said that by having these sort of deep conversations with deep, we'll call them maybe for now, soul friends, you can begin to heal. Harvard Business Review had an article that I read many years ago, and I assume that there was a book associated with this article. It was just too good to just be a little article in Harvard Business Review, although that ain't so bad of a place to be. but it was all about how the greatest leaders in business, politics, finance, whatever, usually had gone through some sort of trauma that created the resilience that they needed in order to be the sort of leaders that could guide their organizations, not only through difficult times, but to excel in wonderful times as well. Orion was blinded. He goes to the Cyclops in order to heal, in order to gain his sight, which I take symbolically to mean a new level of insight into his life and who and what he is capable of becoming in the future. Now, there is an alternative version of this story in which it is not the Cyclops that heals Orion's blindness. It is Helios, the sun. Helios was a titan, which is a kind of god that was a little bit more primordial, and physically they were larger than the Olympians. Helios drove the chariot of the sun over the earth every day. And if you looked at Helios and you could see, as we all know, just simple reality, if you look at the sun and you can see, you get blind. If you approach Helios and you're blind, as did Orion, his hands touch you. The light of the sun fills your eyes and your soul. You're unblinded. You can see. And to me, that story goes as to when you are in your darkest spaces, it can humble you enough so that you are able to have that psychic damage that you're living with, that the blindness is a symbol of, healed, but also gain insight. You mentioned, and you can heal. How and why does healing matter to people who are seeking to become leaders worthy of Mount Olympus?
If you are not healed, just think about it as you got a rock in your shoe, something as simple as that. You can't walk normally, not for long. It affects, and if you do that, then it affects, especially if you get older, your hips. And then over time, if you're not walking normally, then it can affect your back. And then if your back is affected, then everything is affected. And if everything is affected, your mood, all of these things, it just continues to build and build and build. You know, something as simple as a little stone in your shoe can do that. Imagine what neglect can do to how you show up to the world. Imagine what an unhealed, deep, terrible experience that just happens as a function of life, that's not dealt with, how you can manifest in your daily life with this weight. As far as I know, human beings are as expansive inwardly as the universe is outwardly. We've got all of space here. However, our ability to shove things down deep doesn't go very deep. It can stay dormant. And people say a lot of the time heals all wounds. And I profoundly disagree with that. Time just sinks wounds a little deeper, a little deeper to where it's more easy to ignore. But this energy still exists. And a lot of time for me, when I was completely unaware of this whole idea about healing and all that, I would notice that I would say things that I didn't mean to say, or I would do things that I didn't mean to do. Most inconvenient times, inappropriate, especially for Diego, inappropriate times and all this stuff. And I wondered where all that stuff was coming from. And I'd come to know over time that it was coming from a place of just not healing, not paying attention to the things within me that needed to be brought to balance. And so if you are in a leadership position and you have multiple life events, which if you're older than like 4, you have these, and you're not dealing with these things, it's impossible for you to be at your best. There's no way around it. There's absolutely no way around it. And the hardest part is to try to tell that story to someone who's just absolutely stubborn. You know, there's just, no, I'm good. No, you trust me. Like, okay. And they can't see it. What everyone else, it's like not taking a shower. You may not necessarily be able to smell it, but everyone else around you can. So if you have unhealed trauma, it is entirely possible that you are showing up to the world in a different way than the world sees you, which, what is that? 99.999% of the world. So you can just know that if you choose to, or trust that if you choose to, and start doing something about it. We're talking about trust. You can have your heart and soul in the right place. But if you are showing up out of balance, you are showing up incongruent to something. And we were talking before about how people can read energy, whether or not they're wired in or not. They may not know. They probably don't know. But what they do is they sense this person is showing up in a different way than they're speaking. And the energetic center of them is watching this person with like a deeper, what's going on here? How come this doesn't add up? And that can happen on a subconscious level. So if you have problems with trust, you're like this very trustable person and you're all this and that, but people don't seem to trust you. It really could entirely be just unhealed trauma. You heal that stuff. You don't have to do anything different. You just heal and show up as you always are, and they will see you in a place of alignment and balance. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, this person's a straight shooter. Whatever it is, I can just, cool. It can just be reason. So healing is massively important. And the last thing I'll say, although this is another thing we can talk about for hours and hours and hours. If you're not healed, you see the world through that unhealed lens, which is not how things are. If you cannot see how things simply are, just think about what kind of impact that can have on you as a leader. If you see it with the twisted lens of unhealed trauma and baggage and all this stuff, you see everything like that, subconsciously or otherwise, how can you possibly be the most effective leader you can be?
Wow. Again, we have probably 3 entire podcast episodes separate from this, just on the last few sentences. I will say that when you're talking about unhealed trauma and incongruency between how you feel you are and what you're presenting outside, it reminds me, and I am truly, anyone watching this, understand I am not making a political statement with what I'm about to say. I truly am not. But it reminds me of a certain former presidential candidate who was known to those around her. In fact, there was even an author that was assigned to write a hit job book on her about what a horrible person she was, who researched her, and said, and he sort of got ostracized from the sponsors or the people who had commissioned this book. He was like, everything I actually found out about when I investigated her was that she was fundamentally honest, that she was fundamentally a good, decent, hardworking, well-intentioned person. But people wouldn't believe it. And I suspect that it was because she had unhealed trauma. She did present in a way that was extraordinarily insincere. And when she attempted to appear sincere, it came off fake. And, I can't help but then, after hearing what you're saying, think, well, this person, and again, most people probably are guessing who this person is. This person probably, as you said, we all do if we've lived past the age of 4, maybe even before then, dealing with trauma. Maybe this person felt that they couldn't, or maybe this person felt that they never had that hill that they could go to with someone. And so, as you mentioned in the latter part of that set of remarks, they were bringing this warped sense of how the world will receive them, what the world is like, into their presentation. That incongruency was read as untrustworthiness, even though people that actually knew or investigated this individual kept insisting that she wasn't. So that's something heavy duty to consider, even if this political figure is someone that you don't like. And maybe even it's worth asking, do I ever present that way? Am I ever giving off that same sort of vibe to the world? Similarly, speaking of healing, you've mentioned this earlier in the conversation, and you just mentioned it now, the idea of energy and energetic connection as being tied to leadership. I have had clients, CEOs, people who are already CEOs, as opposed to, let's say, an emerging leader, can tend to be like this. I'm a numbers guy. I just want the outcomes. I want to see the KPIs, this, that, and the other. Now, I will not deny outcomes, particularly financial, but other sorts of hard outcomes are important in the overall business and leadership development skill package that one might possess or that one needs to possess. But people often discount things like energetic connection as, or the energy that you're putting out that people might read as woo-woo or airy-fairy or anything like that. Orion, you said at the very beginning of your storytelling about him, was the son of Poseidon. Poseidon, god of the seas, controller of the waters. The waters cover a huge part of the earth. The waters represent, according to many psychologists and experts a lot smarter than me, the subconscious. Myth is the language or is the symbolic expression of the subconscious. You are saying that we store unhealed trauma within our subconscious, yet it emerges in one way or the other, just as an island emerges from the seas when a volcano erupts. Trident approach uses some very unconventional approaches that connect the subconscious and the energy that it has unleashed into the leadership realm. You do so boldly and unapologetically. Talk to us a little bit about that. You know exactly what I mean.
Well, it's funny you mentioned about politicians, because I think politicians are, at least in our culture, the way to show up as a politician is, how do I win the hearts and minds of the masses? Meaning, what do I understand about them so that I know how to show up in the world and win? And in my mind, you will always lose by starting with, well, I wonder what they think. I wonder what they just be. And the biggest gripe that I ever hear about from anyone in our culture is that our politicians are completely full of it. They're completely disingenuous. We can't trust them. Why is that? Because they don't feel like they can show up simply as who they are and win the hearts and minds of these people to go on doing great things. Take this female politician you're talking about. This guy's, I think to her core, she's actually really honest. But she's taken this, what if she just showed up as she is, take it or leave it? I mean, how many people love Donald Trump just because he's a take it or leave it kind of guy?
Exactly.
He's just like, oh, finally somebody. Well, what if everyone was like that? We would come to understand that this person doesn't need to check off all of our boxes. because it's not about checking off boxes. Do I trust this person with leading us in the right direction for the next 4 years with our best interests at heart? We haven't had a yes to that. People, you'll always find thousands, but you won't find tens of millions. You're never going to find tens of millions of people trusting somebody who is trying to fit a narrative. So this is not only a big leap for politicians to consider, but as every human, because every human suffers from the same thing in our culture, generally speaking. We suffer from this whole idea of, well, if I'm not this way, then people aren't going to like me. If people don't like me, I'm going to be abandoned. If I'm, that's one of the core fundamental needs of a human being, is to be accepted into the tribe. We're just afraid that we're not good enough at our core, which is crazy. That's not crazy. It's just so not the case. We were not put on this earth to become a single mass of something. We are here as individuals to explore and develop and, chaotically construct this individualistic thing within all of us. That's what we were meant. We weren't meant to be like, okay, you're individuals. Now we have to funnel into this thing. So we come out as this one. Although we are all one, but we were given the gift of individuality for a reason. We have the opportunity to just really lean in deep and hard about that. And that's, I think, what you were saying about what we do with the Trident approach is that is all the juice. Who am I really? Because that I get to unleash to the world in every way I want to. And it's mine. It is real. It's genuine. And I think it's really healthy, by the way, also.
You said also that the capacity for individual expansion, more or less you said this, is limitless, as is our capacity for external expansion. And you mentioned that psychedelics are part of the approach that is within the Trident organization's overall leadership development portfolio. Talk about, we're talking about the subconscious.
Yeah.
We're talking about the inner expansion. Why on earth would we be mentioning psychedelics then? Talk to us. A lot of people that are watching this may be hearing this and saying, I kind of don't get it. Why would he have psychedelics as part of his toolkit? And as someone who really has integrated this and seen some results in settings that may surprise people, I would love to hear what you have to say about that, particularly with your own military background being quite relevant here.
Yeah, so psychedelics are a tool. It's like a hammer or a screwdriver to achieve something, and that, or achieve's not the right word, to bring into awareness things that aren't typically able to be brought into one's awareness with what I would call the thinking mind, which is where we're pretty much always kind of hanging out in our culture. It's just, if I think it, this my world is right in between these two spaces here, between my ears. Psychedelics are a tool. They're not the only tool. They are a tool to help you reach elevated states of consciousness, which is beyond the thinking mind, which is really the seat of who we are, of really who we are. And this is an enormous thing, because the vast majority of our culture believes that we are who we think we are. Why wouldn't we? That we are capable of what the mind is capable of doing and nothing more. We have no real awareness that we are as expansive as the universe is outwardly. And the only way to come to this awareness is through elevated states of consciousness, where you are the subconscious, the conscious, all this stuff is all readily experienceable in a single moment. If you don't have that experience, then your experience is limited to what you're able to perceive and think about, which is so tiny. For example, Terence McKenna says, I learned more in 5 hours of doing mushrooms than I did in 15 years of psychology and research and therapy. 5 hours, you learn more than you did in 15 years. What does that mean? What that means is all the greatest minds, the psychological minds of the time, who did their very best work, created their opus and created a book to teach other psychology students. The very, very, very best that they had for their life's work was the very thinnest layer of the surface. Everything else happens underneath all of that. And if you're not in that space, how could you know? How could you know who you are? How could you know what you are? Stanislav Grof says psychedelics are to the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy. Oh, how could you know if you are not in an elevated state of consciousness what you are? If you are a leader and you have no idea who you are, and you perform at a certain level, whatever that is, imagine the monstrous advancements you might make if you began to actually come into alignment with who and what you really are.
So, those who follow this show are probably aware that in 2023, middle of the year, I came down with a sudden, dramatic, and severe illness that almost killed me. And it literally started one day with me feeling like a knife sort of slashing sensation in my neck. And within 10 days, I couldn't walk and was in and out of consciousness. And I got better, came home, my body healed. My mind was, once I was, alert and physically on the mend, my mind was back to what it had been. But the only way to describe the longer term impact of this sudden, severe, and unexplained, and to this day, by the way, for those of you who haven't heard about this illness that I have is mysterious. No one knows what it was. The hospital, the diagnosis officially was more or less an unknown pathogen that I caught. And my soul, the only way I can describe it was my soul was shattered, or my spirit was shattered. I was like, what happened to me? It led to this existential crisis, metaphysical crisis even. And so I went on a facilitated psilocybin magic mushroom journey with a shaman. I will just say this, always research who you're working with. Be careful, make sure that they have credentials, that they're trustworthy, that they know what they're doing, all of these sorts of things. I did that sort of research. I found the right person. I made sure that we had the appropriate set and setting, which means that you go to the right place to do it, that's calm, that won't set you up to go into a bad, right? You don't want to do these sorts of things as a healing modality in the middle of a haunted house exhibit. Okay, you just don't. And then, this was a calm, relaxing place with peaceful music playing. And then the set. What is the intention that you set? My intention was for my spirit, or for the spirit, the great spirit, to show me my light. The facilitator helped me come to that intention. And why am I sharing all this? Because I literally experienced a myth during that journey. And two things happened. quickly describing the journey, I was looking for my light to be shown to me, and every time I would kind of see it, I'd grab it, and then it would be gone. Meanwhile, the entire experience that I had, the story that I was living out, was under a light that was indigo. Number two, at the very end, under this indigo sky surrounded by indigo mountains and indigo trees, and on top of an indigo Mayan pyramid, I lay on my back and I put my hands up to the sky and I elevated, and at my feet, I could see my spirit expanding, 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 expanding. And for the first time, I understood how small everything that was physical about me was, including the thoughts and the intellect within my brain. And yet, through seeing the true size of my spirit versus the size of everything that I conceived myself of being, I saw how I was limiting my own ability to expand and be in this world. In a quality psychedelic experience, you go through with your facilitator or your shaman or whatever, something called integration afterwards, in which you process everything that occurred during these experiences. And I remember being frustrated. I was like, I wanted the spirit to show me my light. It kept disappearing every time I grabbed for it. He said, aren't you aware that indigo is a color on the light spectrum? And it was everywhere. You weren't shown your light. You weren't looking for it. You were running for something else. And that, to me, symbolically, was beginning to do exactly what you're saying. Understand who and what I was and own it, and stop reaching for a light that everyone else was saying what I was needing, that enabled me to fit in. And with that, the expansion of the soul that I could see began. I would like to, in light of that story that I'm sharing, just to create what you talked about earlier, that sense of trust and openness and honesty that any conversation needs to have to be a conversation on the hill. If that sort of experience is something that you've encountered elsewhere, is it something that helped expand you? How does it relate then to the overall themes we're talking about? Authenticity, being yourself, having courage, all these other soft, quote unquote, soft leadership skills, knowing the inner truth.
Well, that's just the thing. Do you know inner truth? If your deepest understanding of inner truth is all limited with what you're capable of doing in terms of thinking, one of the hardest, like, cold showers anyone can take is the real assessment of what you know. What do you know that hasn't been told to you? What do you know that is within your experience but hasn't been shaded by prejudice or biasness or not having all the information or all these things, really human components? What do you really know? Like, I know the alphabet, and I know, like, I'd call these reading glasses, and these can help me read more clearly. Like, I know things like that. But if I sit and ponder about who I am, it's not the mind's job to understand things on that existential level. But because as our culture, we're so disconnected from who and what we are, we can only use the mind, and the mind's going to be like, oh, I can help. I know. I'll help it figure it out. Oh, this is where, oh man, I came to this realization the other day, and it's so amazing. And it's just, well, why does it matter? The reason why it matters is because if you were like I was and you were taught the whole notion that knowledge is power, in other words, if you don't know, you're weak. In other words, if you are weak, what value do you have to the tribe? I better matter or I'm in trouble. And if knowing makes me matter, then you better goddamn believe I know. And knowing is the opposite of learning. I know this, so you don't need to tell me. I already know. How can you know deep truth when it's only done through the lens of the human thinking mind? We know nothing. We have an experience. We have, this probably sounds pretty good. This is probably the situation. But what do we really know outside of our perception of the mind? So this is why being deeply connected or have the ability to deeply connect with elevated states of consciousness, all of this can make sense in an instant. Oh, okay. And the only thing that's holding on to that whole idea of knowing what I know is ego, fear of all kinds of things. And when you understand that the ego is not all of who we are or what we are, and you move beyond the fear of this component within you, then everything starts to open up. So if you're able to switch the whole idea of knowing, which is curiosity, everything opens up. And not that knowing comes any more clearly. It's a universe of possibilities, maybe. And what that does, especially in leadership, is just like, well, I know this, and so therefore this, and I can't be wrong. And it's like, oh man, how many companies have sunk because of that? How many people have left jobs because they just can't deal with that kind of stubborn, all the stuff. But the problem is we celebrate that in our culture. This guy's a strong leader. The irony is that is a weakness. Someone like that would be afraid to really experience the idea that they don't know. It's a powerful person who's like at home in their arena of reality anyway, that I don't know this. Well, who knows? Let's do our best and move on. Let's go. That's power. And people in our culture see that as weakness, as like, oh, this guy's indecisive or whatever. It's like, okay, great. You made a decision. Fantastic. Live and die by it. I get the value in that, but to see that as like the epitome of strength, believe me, it takes a much stronger person to say, I don't know, and genuinely meet it. Not like, oh, I don't know. I mean, thought, processing, come to your best conclusion, be like, but who knows? Yeah. It's scary for a lot of people. Because then what? Then there's no answer. And we don't know how to deal in that language yet. But there's a way to learn where that becomes the most powerful answer there could be. Maybe.
And Diego, I have to also say that what you're saying triggers within me is the thought that also if I know, and there's nothing to learn, then there's no space for creativity. Unless you really want to say to yourself, nope, I am the sort of leader that has no creativity and I don't want to have any creativity and blah, 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 then you cannot afford to be the sort of leader that's I know, right? If you do know everything, then why is there a need for there's inherently no need for creativity, because creativity exists to fill the space of the unknown or to explore or build something new out of the unknown. And if there's no unknown, then there's no, like I said, there's no space for creativity. And it's hard to then imagine that stepping back from ego and looking at the global business or economic or cultural or whatever situation that we might be in, that creativity is going to be an asset that we want to throw away. Because, like it or not, as much as we may think we know, the world is changing pretty fast. And circumstances, economic downturns, catastrophes, those sorts of things that require pivoting, which requires creativity, don't stop just because you think you know everything. And this whole, I think that at least 3/4 when I was working for other people of the jobs I quit, it was because of someone around me, either someone empowered by the boss or the boss themselves, who was of this exact impossible, I know, and half the time they didn't. I'd have non-lawyers when I was in legal positions thinking they were brighter than Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, come on.
That's just fear. And that's just being disconnected from the self, because when you're connected to yourself, there is no fear that you're not good enough. You are, like in every sense of the word, are. I am. It's not a small thing. It's power beyond power. So there's nothing to be afraid of when you are as you are. But that's not easy. It can take people years or even a lifetime, or even maybe a lifetime isn't even enough for them to actually come to deep connection with simply being. Who knows? But just even being on the path is a powerful path to be on. You don't have to, reach enlightenment or whatever. I certainly am not. But when I look at where I am at now, when I'm choosing this path of being, as opposed to like choosing this path of, well, I need to be a Navy SEAL, or I need to do this, I need to do that in order to be somebody. I'm light years ahead of that. Light years ahead of that, simply by being in a state of presence. That's it. There is no fear. So if you're protecting yourself from something, the only thing you are protecting yourself from is, well, really nothing, because you're protecting yourself from the fear that you're creating anyway. So it is nothing. When you dig past and keep digging, it is deeper and deeper and deeper. You can't do this through thinking about it, and deeper and deeper and deeper. You recognize that fear is literally just a puff of smoke. There's nothing there. It's the thing that limits humans the entirety of their lives, a puff of nothingness smoke.
And that, interestingly enough, was a big revelation that came through this same psilocybin experience that I had for the first time. I understood that fear was like a piece of trash that I could just crumple up and throw away. Never occurred to me. Mm-hmm. As we move to the last phase of this conversation, I want to circle back to something that ties into everything that we've just said, which was beautifully put in the description that you had of putting on that head covering and looking up at the sky and seeing Orion and saying, he's my guy, he's here. Mm-hmm. Every client that I have, I urge to try and identify some Olympian or mythical avatar that is their guy or their gal or their whomever that they look up to in that night sky and say, you're here with me during that illness. And so many times in my life afterwards, I myself have thought about Helios. I delivered a TEDx talk, for instance, in April of 2024, and I was so nervous because every time when I was rehearsing it, I was screwing it up. And right before I went out, I let down my mind, my intellect, and simply said,
the thing that is in the way.
Yeah, Helios, speak through me. And I got up on that stage.
Surrender.
And I didn't make any mistakes at all. That was the first time after months of rehearsing that I managed to get the entire thing out of my mouth with passion and feeling, without errors, by letting it go, by connecting with that, what I called a higher power or the avatar. Yes. But really it is the acknowledgement that what we are right now isn't I don't want to say it's not that we're not enough, because we are enough, but that there is always more that we can become. Again, it sort of goes as to an acknowledgement, at least as I see it, of that inner expansion that's possible. That this mythical figure, this thing of almost endless proportion, and be there to guide us to. And so I would like to just talk to you about sort of thinking about looking at at Orion. And again, I don't think I'll ever forget that image of you doing that. You put it so powerfully. Do you think that that's something that can help other people on their journeys, or is that Scott Mason just being crazy again?
About having this thing?
Yeah.
I don't think it's Scott being crazy. I think it's Scott understanding, if I'm understanding you correctly, which I may not be, but if I am understanding you correctly, there is nothing outside of us that we are not. I need to be the thing in the sky that I look at, and that's my guy. There's nothing outside of us that we are not. We are enough. We really are enough. It's just a matter of, am I tapping in to all that I am? That's the key. Putting the faith or the striving or the pursuit or whatever into anything outside of the self, with the intention of, the highest state of existence, you'll always run. You'll always pursue. You'll always, and you'll never reach, because it won't be enough. You'll reach the sun, and the sun is only capable of so much. I can reach Orion, and I'll look, and all of a sudden, when you rotate the constellation, it doesn't look like a hunter at all. It looks like who knows what it looks like, because these stars are billions of miles away, and hundreds of millions of light years away from each other, and they create different shapes. It's all the same thing, just like fear. It's nothing. The one thing that exists is you. When I am looking for my deepest, when I need something the most, it's here. And it helps to get here through elevated states of consciousness. Psychedelics are not the only way. Sensory deprivation tanks. Deep meditation is the most powerful way to get here. It's the most sustaining way to get here. Vision quests, near-death experiences, all of these things, you're like, oh, this is real truth. When I need something and I need it, it's here. And I don't read books, because that's just other people's interpretations of maybe their thinking mind, which I don't, whatever. What is here? That's what needs to be pursued in my mind to really connect most powerfully with what is.
The hunt for what is. The quest to find all that one is. I can't help but think, in the biggest sense of all, that's who and what Orion really was. Diego, if there were a single thing that I take away from this rich, thought-provoking conversation, I will say it is this concept that you just shared of understanding what is within and the endless expansiveness of what we each have inside, and the importance of connecting to that, perhaps starting with conversations on the hill. That will be a through line carry with me for a very long time. And on the behalf of those who watch, and personally, I thank you for that incredible gift. If there's one final thing or set of things that you want to say, or one last point that you want to reiterate, by all means, Take it away.
Yeah. So we've been really deep this whole time. We can go a little shallower for fun. What I love about Orion and also his connection to leadership is he broke all the rules. The king said, hey, do this. He did. He said, do this. He did. He did everything he could better than he could. And when he didn't get the results he needed, he took action, took the situation in his own hands and made it happen for himself. Leaders who are bound by the rules, who are written for people who don't understand what's going on. You're always limited. Always. Who's making these rules, by the way? Are they, who's making these rules? Are they bigger and brighter and more vast than who you really are? Probably not. Rules are for people who don't know what's going on. When you have the bigger spectrum, the bigger understanding of what's going on, you have the power to decide which rules to follow and which rules. You are so powerful, no one can limit you. Only you can. So if somebody's limiting you and it's meaningless, it's meaningless. Do what you need to do and you'll win.
Oh, heck yeah. I love that. I've just got to say, and then I do want to make sure you have the last word today. One of the things that drives me crazy that reminds me of, and especially in law school, there was someone I knew who was always chiming this bell. But you hear it in lots of contexts. Don't do this. Don't do that. It's inappropriate. That's one thing. If someone says, don't do this, don't do that because it's hurting someone or it's undermining your mission, then there's a rational. But this sort of pearl clutching, that's inappropriate. My reaction to that was always, please don't tell someone like me something's inappropriate. All that'll do is force me to do it. And that's sort of what I'm hearing. Too many people are sadly in too much innovation and creativity. And again, going back to your central themes, personal expansion, stop because of appropriate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who is saying what's appropriate? Appropriate to who?
Yeah. Yeah. MDMA earlier this month just chose to keep psychedelics a Schedule I drug, which is no medicinal value, no, or high potential for abuse. So it's literally on the same sentence as crack cocaine. And we've known we've been doing studies on psychedelics since the 1940s. We know they work. It's profound. There's decades of research that supports this entirely. And the government says, you're not to use psychedelics. So I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's it. Like, no, I'm going to go down to Peru. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I go to Mexico and do what I'm going to do. I'm going to find churches within the United States. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I don't care what you say. I'm not going to let you limit who I am, limit what I am, limit what I can become. Who are you to tell me?
Hell yeah. Hey, Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
Sitting in the front of the bus was a little bit inappropriate, but exactly. Didn't stop her. She wasn't going to move.
She inspired a movement.
That's, boy, talk about a mythical figure.
Yeah. No, she's real as it gets, man. She's a powerful, powerful being. And we're talking about her because she matters, because she's a leader. We all matter. But she was significant in what we got an opportunity to experience in this country. Thank God for her. Thank the gods for her. Yeah.
Diego, how can people find out more about you?
Oh, we are at 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝐺.com, all three words. I'm on LinkedIn, Diego Ugaldé. And yeah, those are probably the biggest places that we occupy, I think.
And while you are on Diego's website, please, I beg of you, don't make me grovel. Order this man's book. It is so good. Loved it. I loved it. And again, you will see the richness of Diego's thoughts as well as the true power of his storytelling when you read his writing. It's so worth it. Diego, thank you so much for being with us today. For those of you who have enjoyed this episode, be sure to press the thumbs up button and leave a supportive remark.
in the comments. If there is a leadership question that you have that you'd like us to address in a future episode, or a mythical character that you'd like to have explored, also put that in the comments. You never know, that person or that discussion may pop up pretty soon. Be sure to subscribe to this channel too. And above all else, keep coming back for more and more rich conversations about myths, life, and leadership here at the Myth Slayer Cafe.